Sarah Chen stood before Miranda Ellis's final exhibition at the Hawthorne Gallery, her newly transplanted eye fixed on the grotesque figures that writhed across the canvas. The paintings were arranged chronologically, showing the artist's descent from conventional landscapes into something darker. In the final piece, dated just 3 days before Miranda's death, elongated shadows twisted through what appeared to be a distorted clock face, their forms stretching like pulled taffy through the warped numbers. The gallery was nearly empty on this rainy Tuesday afternoon, which suited Sarah fine. She'd taken the day off from her architectural firm, telling her partner she needed rest. Instead, she'd spent hours researching Miranda Ellis, trying to understand the woman whose eyes she now carried within her skull. A security guard's footsteps echoed through the high-ceiling space, and Sarah's peripheral vision caught a flicker of movement that wasn't the guard. Something dark and fluid, like ink dropped in water, twisted in the space between her and the painting. When she turned her head, it vanished. These sightings had started 3 weeks after the transplant. At first, they were easy to dismiss as her brain adjusted to the new eye, but they'd grown more frequent, more substantial. And now, standing before Miranda's artwork, Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The artist hadn't been hallucinating. She'd been seeing something real. "We're closing in 15 minutes, ma'am," the guard called out. Sarah nodded, but her attention was caught by a small placard beside the final painting. It mentioned Miranda's diagnosis with a rare form of temporal lobe epilepsy that altered her perception of time. The condition had emerged 6 months before her death, around the same time her art style had dramatically changed. As Sarah read, the air around her seemed to thicken. The guard's footsteps slowed, becoming deeper, drawn out like a record played at the wrong speed. A shadow detached itself from the painting, flowing into the space between Sarah and the placard. This time, when she turned to look directly at it, it didn't disappear. The entity was tall, its form constantly shifting like smoke underwater. It had no features she could discern, but she felt its awareness of her. The gallery lights flickered, and in that millisecond of darkness, she felt something brush against her face. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart pounding. The guard's footsteps suddenly resumed their normal pace, and the shadow creature vanished. But she knew what she'd seen. Her architect's mind, trained to understand space and dimension, began to grasp the truth. These beings existed in the gaps between moments, in the milliseconds our brains usually filtered out. Miranda's neurological condition had allowed her to perceive them. And now, through her donated eye, Sarah could see them too. She rushed home through the rain, her mind racing. In her apartment, she pulled out her laptop and began documenting everything: the sightings, the time distortions, the connection to Miranda's condition. She worked frantically, knowing she needed to record this while she still could. Hours passed, though her clock showed only minutes. The shadows gathered around her, growing bolder. They no longer hid when she looked at them. Instead, they seemed to study her with the same intensity. She studied them. Her phone rang, making her jump. It was Dr. Patterson, her transplant surgeon. "Sarah, we've been reviewing your latest test results and something's come up. I need you to come in first thing tomorrow." "What kind of something?" Sarah asked, watching a shadow entity slide along her living room wall. "There are some unusual patterns in your temporal lobe scans. Similar to..." He paused. "Similar to what we found in Miranda Ellis's autopsy." Sarah's throat tightened. "You told me she died in an accident." "That was the official ruling," Dr. Patterson said carefully. "But there were inconsistencies. Her brain showed signs of extreme temporal lobe deterioration, as if she'd experienced decades of aging in a matter of months. As he spoke, the shadows converged around Sarah. Time stretched like warm toffee. She watched a drop of water fall from her rain-dampened hair, taking minutes to travel the space between her head and shoulder. "Dr. Patterson," she said slowly, "I don't think Miranda's condition was causing her to hallucinate. I think it allowed her to see something that was already there. Something that's been there all along, hiding in our blind spots. And now I can see them too." The shadows pressed closer. In the space between 1 second and the next, Sarah saw their true form. They weren't just hiding in the gaps between moments. They were creating those gaps, feeding on time itself. And now they knew she could see them. "Sarah, are you there?" Dr. Patterson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "They're not just passive observers," Sarah whispered. "They're parasites. They're eating away at time itself, making it unstable. That's what happened to Miranda. She saw too much, and they..." Her voice trailed off as she realized the entities had completely surrounded her. "Stay where you are," Dr. Patterson said urgently. "I'm calling an ambulance." But Sarah knew it was too late. The shadows had realized their hiding place was compromised. First Miranda, now her. They couldn't risk being exposed. She felt them reaching for her, their touch like ice against her skin. Time began to splinter around her. With trembling hands, she typed one final note on her laptop. "They live in the space between seconds. They eat time itself. And if you see them, they'll..." The shadows surged forward. Sarah felt time twist and stretch, years compressing into seconds, decades into minutes. Through her donor's eye, she watched her own body age, wither, and decay in the space between one heartbeat and the next. When the paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, they found Sarah Chen's body, aged beyond recognition. Her laptop was open, the screen cracked, and the document was unsaved. And on the wall, drawn in what appeared to be Sarah's own blood, was a perfect recreation of Miranda Ellis's final painting, the twisted shadows dancing through the broken face of a clock. In the corner of the room, between one tick of the clock and the next, something dark and fluid slipped away, unseen by human eyes. The space between seconds grew just a little bit longer, the flow of time a little more unstable, as the entities continued their patient, eternal feast. Dr. Patterson arrived at the scene an hour later, his face pale as he examined Sarah's aged corpse. His hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a letter, one that Miranda Ellis had written to him before her death, warning him about what she'd discovered. A letter he dismissed as the ravings of a mentally ill patient. As he stood in Sarah's apartment, watching the forensics teamwork, his new contact lens began to itch. The experimental ones, designed to correct a rare visual distortion in his left eye. And in his peripheral vision, something dark and fluid began to move.